They could be your sons or daughters. 21st century slaves, sex slaves, and the victims of child trafficking right here in America. But now, in an amazing FBI sting operation across the country, 79 of these children have been rescued from that hell they were in.
The bust was part of a 3-day crackdown in 57 cities. Now the challenge is how to help these children recover. Heather Sells has the story.
The FBI rescued children between the ages of 13 and 17. Experts say predators often find these kids on the streets after they've run away from home.
They offer them kindness, shelter, friendship, even love. However, at some point, these kids discover they've lost the ability to walk away.
More than 8,000 law enforcement agents across the country participated in the crackdown. Since the FBI began focusing on child trafficking in 2003, it has rescued 2,200 kids and convicted more than 1,000 adults involved in selling them for sex.
They are truly hidden victims. They're manipulated, they are violated in all kinds of ways. They truly are 21st century slaves.
The next challenge, helping the newly rescued victims recover. The FBI says the children will receive medical care and counseling.
How we take care of these young ladies after they've been rescued is a critical key to Operation Cross Country being successful.
Christian ministries like Hope House offer shelter and counsel victims. The work is tough, they say, because the victims often have been mentally as well as physically abused and often don't see themselves as victims.
I feel like that a lot of what we're doing is stabilizing them, helping them learn healthy boundaries, helping them learn self-esteem, maybe some trust that there are people that care.
The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that some 100,000 kids in the U.S. are victims of child sex trafficking every year. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, millions of children are exploited, not children only, but young women are exploited primarily for sex all around the world. It's a hideous thing, and we want to do everything we can to stop it. And I congratulate the FBI for this effort, and we need a lot more like it. Wendy Griffith has the rest of our top stories from the CBN Newsroom. Wendy.
Pat, supporters and opponents of Arizona's immigration law are staking out their positions on Monday's Supreme Court ruling. The High Court issued a mixed bag in its decision, striking down 3 of the law's 4 key provisions, but leaving intact the most controversial part. John Jessup has more on the reaction.
Each year, hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants are apprehended in Arizona alone. To combat the problem, the state enacted Senate Bill 1070, and after being stuck in nearly 2 years of legal challenges, the High Court struck down all but one of the law's provisions, leaving intact the most controversial part, the so-called Show Me Your Papers provision, allowing police to check the legal status of anyone they pull over. Opponents worry that authority could lead to racial profiling.
We have to stop following Arizona's footsteps of pursuing policies based on hatred and fear.
It's a concern echoed by the White House. In a statement, President Obama said, "Going forward, we must ensure that Arizona law enforcement officials do not enforce this law in a manner that undermines the civil rights of Americans." At issue, whether state immigration laws infringe on what's traditionally seen as a federal prerogative. The court said it is fundamental that foreign countries concerned about the status, safety, and security of their nationals in the United States must be able to confer and communicate on the subject with one national sovereign, not the 50 separate states. While Arizona Governor Jan Brewer claimed the ruling as a victory,
the heart of Senate Bill 1070 has been proven to be constitutional.
Some supporters didn't exactly see it the same way.
Now the state of Arizona and all 50 states are at the mercy of the federal government as to which aspects of federal law this president decides he's going to enforce on any given day, which I guess in part will determine how close we are to the election and how much he thinks he needs certain votes.
In a dissenting opinion, Justice Scalia wrote, Arizona moved to protect its sovereignty not in contradiction of federal law, but in complete compliance with it. If securing its territory in this fashion is not within the power of Arizona, we should cease referring to it as a sovereign state. Arizona Congressman Raul Grijalva said he believes the law and the ruling further divides Americans.
Whether we agree or disagree, we're all tied together by one blanket, and it's torn at that social fabric.
This ruling comes in the middle of the race for the White House and for Latino voters. During the Republican primary, the presumptive GOP nominee called the law a model for the nation. In a statement, Governor Romney said, "I believe that each state has the duty and the right to secure our borders and preserve the rule of law, particularly when the federal government has failed to meet its responsibilities." Ultimately, the court's decision put the debate squarely back on Washington to once and for all come up with a solution.
No one believes that comprehensive immigration reform is going to happen in this Congress, but I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that something might be able to get done in the next Congress. It needs to happen.
The court's ruling doesn't necessarily settle all matters related to the case. There are still political and legal challenges to Section 2B, the so-called Show Me Your Papers provision. And Justice Kennedy acknowledged uncertainty with how the law will be interpreted and applied, suggesting that the case will probably work its way back through the courts and constitutional challenges. John Jessup, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
Thanks, John. And in just a few minutes, we're going to show you a new high-tech way to monitor the U.S. border with Mexico, but Washington doesn't want to use it. We'll have that CBN News special report later in the news segment. Pat, what do you think about yesterday's ruling?
Well, Wendy, it's essentially constitutional law 101 is that the federal government has the right to determine the status of citizens and the immigration to our state. The old rule was, though, that if the federal law had preempted an area, then the state had to stay out of it. But the federal government has left a vacuum. And Arizona said, we'll find everything that you want us to do, and we'll do it in absence of your action. And if you want to come act, then, of course, we'll get out of the way. Well, the president has said, and he said it right, that it shows that Congress has to do something. But Obama and the Democrats have had all these years since the last election to come up with comprehensive immigration reform. And they wasted a couple of years on health care, and it looks like the court's going to knock that down. We'll get a ruling on Thursday. But we must have comprehensive immigration reform. And I think we need to take care of these people who are in this country. And what Obama did by executive fiat actually was a pretty smart thing to do. And he preempted the field, if you will. And what Justice Scalia is saying is, wait a minute, you mean Arizona passes a law that limits what the president has said by executive order, and therefore it's unconstitutional. I mean, it's a murky thing that it'll come back into the courts again. Wendy?
Pat, the Supreme Court has also reaffirmed its ruling, allowing businesses and labor unions to spend as much money as they want to in elections. The decision a big victory for those who say the First Amendment rather gives organizations the right to spend unlimited amounts to support or defeat a candidate. The ruling likely means more big spending on this year's presidential election. So-called super PACs, big political action committees, have already spent tens of millions of dollars on the presidential election. House Oversight Committee Chairman Darrell Issa is challenging President Obama's claim of executive privilege. The president used the claim last week to prevent the committee from seeing documents requested from the Justice Department. The documents are tied to the administration's fast and furious gun trafficking operation. Issa wonders if the president is using his power to obstruct that investigation. But some scholars agree that the president has the right to withhold any documents in the executive branch. Well, still more problems for Europe as it tries to find its way out of a terrible debt crisis. Moody's rating agency has downgraded the credit rating of 28 Spanish banks. It comes just as Spain's government asked its European neighbors for help cleaning up its ailing banking sector, and it's a measurement of the bank's ability to repay their debts. The banks are also said to be vulnerable to losses from the country's busted real estate bubble. Spain's economy is the fourth largest of the 17 countries that uses the euro currency. Unemployment is also nearly 25%. And Germany's finance minister has rejected President Obama's calls on Europe to move faster to fight its debt crisis. The German official says, quote, Mr. Obama should first of all take care of reducing the American deficit, which is higher than in the Eurozone. The Eurozone's debt is about 80% of the economy, compared to about 100% in the U.S. The U.S. Supreme Court says it won't get involved in a fight over a war memorial cross in San Diego. Justices refused to review an appeals court ruling that found the Mount Soledad cross unconstitutional because it sits on public land. The case now goes back to the U.S. District Court in California. The legal group representing the Memorial Association says the government could propose adding additions to the memorial instead of removing the cross. Well, doctors should screen every adult for obesity during checkups. That's the recommendation from a government task force. They suggest more physicians calculate their patient's body mass index and say that when a patient crosses the line into obesity, the doctor needs to do more than mention a diet. The doctor should refer them for intensive help with nutrition and fitness. And nutrition, I guess you don't think about nutrition with obesity, but that's an important factor, isn't it, Pat?
It is, but boy, I hate to have the government doing that. That's nanny state all over again. What they're saying is the citizens can't operate on their own. Freedom, ladies and gentlemen, depends on self-restraint. And if you can't control yourself, then there's going to be some governmental agency that'll control you. And that's what we don't want. We want self-regulating, free citizens. That's what has made this country great. And this is one more step toward the nanny state, where the nannies say, well, we have agents out there, they're called doctors, and the doctors are going to take you, and if you pass a certain BMI, body mass index, then we're going to put you on a special diet. Well, hey, if you did it yourself, you wouldn't have the problem.
House Homeland Security Chairman Congressman Peter King is asking the Obama administration why a member of a known terrorist group took part in high-level meetings at the White House and the State Department. TheHill.com reports that King has written to Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano about Hani Noor Eldin. He is a member of the Egyptian parliament and a member of Gamma Islamiyah, which means the Islamic group. It has been designated as a terrorist organization and has been tied to violence in Egypt. The State Department says it is looking into the case. A last-minute court decision allows a Wisconsin man to give away Bibles at a gay pride celebration. Brian Johnson requested he be allowed to set up a booth outside the Twin City Pride Festival, but organizers restricted his access to the event, and their decision was upheld by a federal judge. Johnson's attorneys filed an emergency appeal, and temporary access was granted. Johnson will still have to argue in court for future access to the event. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.